Hey guys, welcome back to Previa Alliance Podcast. This is Sarah
and Whitney,
and we're back. You guys heard her story earlier. We love her, Morgan. We know her as the triplet mom too. Hello, that's always gonna be a thing. But today's a very special episode. It's close to my heart. It's close to your heart. Whitney has experience working in the hospital with this. World Prematurity Awareness. You know, we are talking about when babies are born before they say term, which remind me what's term now, Whitney?
Technically, they changed it to 39 weeks as full term. 37 is what they consider kind of like late preterm, but 36 and under, you are a preemie.
And then what's interesting is if you're a preemie mom or if you went into this, and there's different categories, right? Like I knew I was not making it to 40 weeks. You knew that was not happening. So carrying that through your pregnancy of knowing I'm going to walk this journey, but you really don't know what this journey is. It's hard. And then you have the moms who it just kind of happened out of nowhere. And both is equally hard. But one thing that I didn't know about is what the road after birth looks like. And no one really fully prepared me. And it's scary because during our pregnancies, we've talked about this, is we were told, okay, so if your baby comes at this week, this is what to be expected. This week. That's all just kind of throwing it at the wall. We don't know for sure. I don't think what people talk about when we call prematurity awareness days and stuff is that it is not just a day. It is an everyday thing we live with. And for our new listeners, share when your three wonderful boys, what week were they born with?
So I have triplet boys that were born at 27 weeks and 4 days.
So when this 27 weeks, they were in the NICU for different amounts of time. The shortest was
3 months.
3 months, and the longest
was 4.
4. And during that time, you had to kind of exactly just take it week by week. And day by day, hour by hour, right?
Yeah. They were considered micro preemies, weren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, some days, especially in the beginning, was definitely hour by hour. But yeah, so 2 were born. One was 2 pounds, 4 ounces. One was 2 pounds, 2 ounces. And one was 1 pound, 13 ounces. And so they were, I think, technically considered micro preemies. And there's under 28 weeks, and then there's after 28 weeks. And that's kind of a big, in which we were obviously made it close to that 28 weeks. But when the babies are born before 28 weeks, they do this thing called a golden week, and you're not allowed to hold them for the first week. And basically it's like as minimal movement and stimulation as possible. And the goal of this is ultimately to prevent brain bleeds. Because they are so at risk for brain bleeds that, I mean, even the smallest movement. And so, yes, that is actually something that UAB has created, and I think they've had really good outcomes.
Totally.
That's
and
incredible.
The NICU experience, I know for me, mine was 10 days of Will and 2 days of James, but I don't feel like people talk about it. You know it's going to be hard. You know, but it's very difficult as a mom to see your baby or babies, and you can do nothing to make it better.
You're already going through a very vulnerable time, having gone through a delivery that's early. So most likely an unplanned emergency C-section.
I was going to say, I think anybody in the NICU, you cannot tell me that there wasn't trauma involved in that birth.
Something happened, and it's not always an emergency section. I would say probably 80%.
Yes.
I could probably safely say, especially when we're looking at preemies kind of thing. Not, your full term where they're checking blood sugars and things. Like you could have a very smooth routine delivery with that, and blood sugars are off. So babies
or
in
jaundice
NICU.
now.
Exactly.
Now all jaundice babies
go.
And then maintaining their temperature. My oldest nearly went to NICU because her temp kept dropping after delivery, and she was a 39-weeker kind of thing. So, when we're looking more at preemie babies, then we have to understand that trauma occurred in delivery.
Yes.
Whether it was a stat emergency section or it was a vaginal delivery that progressed very, very rapidly, there was a lot that was out of mom's control with that.
Yes.
So that's already vulnerable. You have a lot of pain that is going on because of delivery. You've got those physical limitations with that. And then come into the NICU setting where they don't really get to call the shots for their baby.
No.
Because you don't know what's best for your baby medically. Some may, if you have a nursing background, you might. But I would say the majority of us don't know what's best for our babies in NICU. And that exacerbates that vulnerability. And that helpless feeling.
I'll never forget being enrolled in post-will. The picture, I'll put it on our social for when we do this. Right. I look like death because I had so even this is, I still remember, I'm like, that was my first photo. Cause then you compare in your head to like everybody's. And I had a hard time looking at how tiny Will was. Mm-hmm. And it was just like literally skin on bone. Mm-hmm. And no one prepared me for that either. And then there's tubes. It's like this little incubator. Mm-hmm. Visually, it's a lot overwhelming because then it's sensory. The lights, the smells, the people.
Everything.
Information
overload.
They're coming at you. Hi, I'm so-and-so. This is this. Mm-hmm. This is what's going on with your baby. Yeah. And you're going, okay. And then you don't know how long you're going to be there. That's the thing. I remember I started playing this guessing game. Okay, so what's the average? And they were like, he's a white boy. So he's a wimpy white boy.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they're like, he's going to be in way longer than a girl.
A person of color.
And I'm like, why? And they're like, because he's a white boy.
Yeah,
and
wimpy
like,
white boy syndrome. I mean,
it's so real.
And I'm like,
it's very real.
And so then you're getting doctrine of like all these like, okay, there's medical words and there's like also like NICU language, right?
Yeah. Right.
Like you got to learn what's a respiratory therapist do here? What does this person do here? We were at academic universities, so we were meeting multiple people on the team. Hey, a med student, they may say this, but let me tell you something. In the day, they ain't making that decision. Right. That's the attending, right? But you don't know that, and you're trying like, well, who says what?
Well, and if they're a med student, you're like, well, you have more knowledge than I do, so I'm just going to take your word for it.
Oh my God. See, the nurse in me was like, okay, next.
See, me being a medical social worker, I'm like, I beg to differ, sir. Go on.
So essentially, you're put into a world that you don't know. There's no way for you to know. And now you have this baby that's supposed to be still inside you that's in this world.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I had this experience, I'm sure you did. People don't know what to say to you when you have a preemie baby.
Right.
They say inappropriate things.
Yeah.
Well, at least they're out and everything's okay right now. Or
they're alive.
They're alive.
Yeah, they're alive.
Right? Or they have no comprehension of what a day in the NICU is like.
Exactly. That's a big one right there.
They think you're going to respond to their text messages as like normal. You're going to continue your life like normal. They don't understand that you may not be able to update because you don't even know what's going on and it's rapidly changed.
Mm-hmm. Right. It changes hour by hour so often with these babies.
It's hard. And I felt like people, and granted, they should live their life, but I feel like I was in this hole and living this tunnel of like, well, what's next? What's the next? Like, oh, he decelled here, or this was his heart rate. And like, they were living their life and couldn't understand why I couldn't catch up. But it was this, none of my friends had NICU babies before.
Right.
And I couldn't even explain what I needed or what I need to feel seen.
Right.
And it was just a really hard, lonely road.
It's very isolating.
It's very isolating. And I think it's very isolating, like you were saying, because most people haven't been there and have no idea what you're going through or kind of even what goes on in there. And it's funny you said that. That was actually something that kind of I was talking about recently that almost is hard for me to grasp and wrap my head around. Like we talked about in the previous episode, I was admitted while I was still pregnant and then delivered about 2.5 weeks later, but stayed in the hospital for about 7 weeks total. And then my boys were in the hospital for several more months after that. And that is something, it's like your life stops.
And everybody else's continues.
And it's a hard thing to like even process. I remember I had been in the hospital for 7 weeks, and the day that I got discharged, on the way home from the hospital, it was such an overwhelming feeling. Like I just started crying on the way home, and I remember my husband being like, what's wrong? And I was like, just looking around, like driving on the interstate, like I haven't heard the radio in almost 2 months.
Yeah.
I've not been in a car in almost 2 months.
It's very surreal.
It is. And it's like, I've been inside of these 4 walls.
Yes.
I was allowed to go outside to the courtyard a couple times. Then I got that privilege taken away. But it was so surreal. And it was very overwhelming.
Very.
To just see, I'm like, all these people's lives, like, they've just kept going.
Right.
They've
And mine
gone to
has
work every day. Like,
literally you
hasn't
stand
stopped.
still.
And then that continued in the NICU because, I mean, my husband was going to work a lot of days, but like, I was there for, I went home and slept, and then I got up and I got to the NICU, and then I typically left like after dinner time.
Yep.
But sometimes we were there very late. But again, it's like everyone else's lives are continuing, and you're sitting in this room. We had no windows.
No windows.
And it's like, this was our life. And it's a very surreal feeling of, I don't know, just to know that everyone else is going about their normal day.
Yeah.
Like, and like nothing's wrong. And you're like,
but everything's
wrong.
Everything's wrong. Your whole world. And
Right.
friendships. Like, you don't know how to navigate that with friendships.
Right.
They don't know how to be there for you. You don't know how to let them be. Was I resentful for people that had easy births and got to take their kids home and wasn't in the NICU? 100%.
Yeah.
Was I like not want to talk about it, or was I upset that you didn't know about something?
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember somebody called like the day after, and Will was having a really bad day in the NICU as a family member, and called my mom. And it's like, she was like, "Oh, is everything okay? I'm in the NICU, blah, blah, blah." And she was like, "Oh yeah, I just was going to ask, can you like see if you can get me a job?"
Stop it.
Hard stop. I was just like,
I had a situation about
and
that.
it's still to this day.
Stop it. That is
I
so
cannot
inappropriate.
be. I've tried to forgive this person,
Mm-hmm.
but like I heard my mother say,
Mm-hmm.
I am in the NICU with Sarah and Will. Like, this person knew I had almost died 2 days ago, and you asked my mom for a job. That I still, and I'm like, do people not know what the NICU is? Do people not know what?
Do they not understand the severity of this? Because like we mentioned a bit
I'm
ago,
clearly not over it.
Right.
I'm clearly not over
Yeah,
this.
like I'm still in recovery.
I'm not over this.
Still like in survival mode, and I just can't help you right now.
Well, and you know, let's be real, there's a spectrum of severity in the NICU. Like we mentioned, you could have a baby, like my oldest, whose temperature was dropping.
Right.
Let's be real, that's not severe. Just being honest. Like if she had gone to the NICU, it would have been a few hours. You know, blood sugar. Okay,
We're
might
talking
be
about
overnight.
preemie babies
Right.
fighting for their lives.
Exactly. We're talking severe.
They're fighting they're trying to, I mean, it's just a whole different thing. Like, it's like the ICU for adults. So, like, no one ever questions. If you're like, oh, my husband's in the ICU, they're like, oh my gosh, what do you
What
mean?
happened?
And then sometimes it comes to babies and they're like, well, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, they just got to pump
Yeah, you
them
kind
up.
of hear NICU, but it's like, no, that is the ICU.
ICU.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Neonatal
We
ICU.
are literally like hour by hour, day by
Yes.
day right now on survival.
Yes.
And like all their vital organs.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I had a situation similar, but it was before the babies were born, when I was extremely sick in the hospital, and I got a call. I won't share much on it, but it was very similar to yours. And to this day, I'm like, I just still can't believe that they
That happened.
continued to have a 30-minute conversation with me about.
Yeah.
See, and this is
Something.
why we talk about boundaries, people.
They just-
like if
it's-
someone is in the hospital, you're not asking them for favors.
Oh, it was.
No,
Let's just be real. If someone is
This
admitted
was-
in the hospital, if someone's child, if anybody has any
Right.
loved one in the
If
hospital,
you start that conversation,
that's not the
I
time
am
to
in
be
the
asking for
hospital.
favors.
Right.
You just need to say, I have
I'm
not,
so
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
Can I have venue money for
Let me
DoorDash?
send you a DoorDash.
That is like, you have all the passes. Oh, my child's in the hospital. I'm
Right.
sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, we'll talk about this later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? We'll save this for another day.
This is
Right.
not important.
We'll circle back.
And that's, and I just realized to this day, I don't think they did anything wrong and doesn't understand. And I think it's probably a mute point. I don't think they're ever going to get it. So we're just going to let that one go. But I think that point is people, that same point they did to me in the hospital, you in the hospital. When we leave the NICU, what do you want people to know about leaving the NICU with a preemie?
Oh, goodness.
And this is a loaded question.
Yeah.
Mhm.
This is actually something I just kind of talked about in therapy this week. there's a lot that comes with leaving the hospital with a preemie. I think to a lot of people, they're like, oh, they're home.
Everything's great. Fine.
She left the hospital with them.
Yeah.
Check mark.
Oh, they got to go home. Great. Oh, no. It was almost like that was just starting a whole different round of this. So for a little background, all 3 of my boys came home on oxygen around the clock, and stayed on it for several months. So basically they reached a point in the NICU where they just kind of couldn't get over that hump. And we were just going to sit in the NICU for months on, half a liter of oxygen when that's something you can do at home. And so, I mean, we were basically running a hospital. Like, I remember my pediatrician saying, like, you basically are running a hospital from your house, and it's basically just like what you can do at home in order to keep them out of actually needing to be admitted. Yeah. Like, you can do a certain point at home, and then if they need more, then they have to go back. And I remember him saying, we're asking you to be so many things. We're literally asking you to be their doctor, to be their respiratory therapist, to be their physical therapist, to do all these things. Like, you have so much just being thrown at you just walking out the door. And I think too, like, just because they came home, being a micro preemie, they were still very sick. And that was one of the things that we really, that kind of caused some issues and some tension with people, is we had to be so incredibly careful because their
infection
lungs
control
were still a fraction of what
a full-term
baby work. Just because they got to go home
doesn't mean they're out of the woods.
No, doesn't mean they're out of the woods at all. And the tiniest little runny nose from us put them back in the hospital. And we've been back in the hospital numerous times. And even today, just this week, all 3 of my boys have been sick. We've been doing highest dose breathing treatments that we can do at home. We've skirted the line of admission all day Tuesday. We were barely there, like down to the minutes. Like, okay.
And they're 2.
Do we take them? And they're 2, and they just turned 2 years old. And a lot comes with it. They do have lung disease because they were born so early. And so we still have to be careful. Once you kind of hit that age of 2, you're not out of the woods, but it is kind of a big milestone to reach. We started, taking them to church at 2 and putting them in the nursery. We went to McWayne Center for the first time. Wow. They started Mother's Day out at 2. And you really can't do any of those things unless, I was able to stay home with them so they didn't have to go to daycare. And even from the time they were in the NICU, it was like they, if at all possible, do not need to go anywhere because it can be detrimental to them. And it's crazy how quickly they would turn corners. And so, I think bringing them home was just, I don't know. I think people don't realize, kind of like we were saying,
complications and maybe the severity of it
still is. And there was that first year was just straight doctor's appointments. And so, anyways, but it also kind of what I was talking to my therapist about earlier this week is we had been in the NICU for over 100 days. I think our last one was there for about 130 days.
Wow.
And so you're with these people and this kind of security blanket for 4 months, and the doctors and the nurses help is steps from your door.
Yeah.
And they just became family to us. There was a spike in COVID when we were in the NICU. And so we then, because we had triplets, we kind of fought to have extra help because I couldn't do it alone. Most people probably haven't seen this, but they were hooked up to so many wires and there were 3 beds in the room, but one baby couldn't reach the other bed with their wires. So I couldn't even physically hold 2 at a time because they didn't reach. And so it had gotten to where just my husband and I were allowed to be there. Well, my husband was back at work and I was there with all 3, which we could talk about that for a little while because I don't think that was what was best for the babies, but it wasn't in our control. But anyways, so I'm trying to work on feeding all 3 of them and holding them and all these things. And thankfully, our nurses became like family and they were godsends, and they would come in there and hold the other ones for me and, help me with feeding. And they would come in there and hang out with me a lot.
It's so lonely.
Because it was so lonely. And I was in this room all day long by myself. And
you feel trapped.
I mean, truly, there's no windows. Like, you are just
we were in a dark room.
A dark room.
It's a box.
And they keep it kind of like dark too for like the babies. And
right. They
and
can't have much light.
But it's just like, it's so isolating. And
it's truly a whole nother world.
It's a world. And you feel so bad. Like, I don't know. I always felt like I wasn't doing enough just for one. So I can't imagine just multiplying how you felt. And like, you physically can't.
No.
Like, when she's talking about the wires and stuff, it is like, I would be like, please help me. And like, they have to set you up and like, you're watching this monitor. I still have triggers to beeps, and you just like watch their heart rate go down, or you hear like the oxygen go low and the alarms, and like you panic. I feel myself getting hot talking about this. You panic. And you're just like, oh my God. And then they come rushing in, or like, you're so helpless.
You are. And for the longest time, I couldn't even go in there and pick them up by myself. Like, you have to ask somebody, like, to ask your nurse to come get the baby out. And eventually, once they got moved to open air cribs, like, I, could go in there and kind of pick them up on my own. But like you were saying, the alarms, like, but you had a comfort blanket that they were just steps away. Like, your help was.
They run in.
Because there were times that I would be holding them, and they would, all of a sudden, their oxygen sat would just plummet, and they would have to be bagged. And like, they're in my arms, not breathing. And it's not good when they come running in and they flip the red switch.
Yeah.
You're just
You've never been in a hospital room, and there's this like red emergency switch that flips all the bright lights on.
Right.
And it is like something out of like, truly like a Grey's Anatomy episode or something. And it's like, take this baby from me, make them breathe.
Fix it.
And that is not natural. Like, that is something like I had to learn therapy. Like, that response of like, I can't do anything to save my baby. Like, and
take my baby from me and save
I'm trusting you to save them and to watch that. And so, kind of like you were asking, leaving the NICU I was just kind of talking about how weird of a feeling and kind of concept this is, that yes, we had been waiting to take them home.
You want this.
Yes, it was exciting, but it was the most terrifying day of my life.
I was about to say, because you're going home without the nurses to come in and flip the red switch, and you'd be like, save my baby.
I'm like,
because
what
you're
am
like, what
I
if this
going to
happens
do?
at home?
And, they convinced me, like, they are ready to go home. And they do make you, they can't have any DSATs or any decels or all these things within so many hours, or your time starts over.
Like,
I've seen it happen.
And you're like, no, I've seen it. I know this
happens.
happens.
And I'm like, no, but what do I do if this is at home? And there were times, we had one that was the smallest, and he was definitely the sickest. And he would do good for days and days and days, and then literally he would just quit breathing. And I was like, I remember telling the doctors, you can't send this baby home with me.
It's too
because
much.
You're like, how can you, like, I couldn't sleep because I have postpartum anxiety too, but like, I'd seen it. And I think that's what people like. I'm like, if you were in the NICU and you have seen that, right? Like, you don't need anything else to make you believe it could happen. Like, intrusive thoughts, like, they're already there. Like, I've already
well, the
seen
worst case scenario has
already happened.
I mean, they take the wires off of them and they hand them to you, and they're like, good job, go home. And you're just like, I remember me and my mom before, like, no.
This is not appropriate.
And they're like, they wouldn't even put them in the car seat. They're like, no, you have to. And you're just like, they're tiny.
Yeah. And so I was just kind of like telling my therapist, and she was kind of talking about it being like a trauma bond, and you're so comfortable, and these people have like become family. And it is literally like, you are there every single day, all day. You eat 3 meals there. Sometimes you're there through the night, during the night, whatever. And then it is like, you leave.
Yeah.
It's like
it's
hard
like it's over.
stop.
There's no good.
There's not a progression to that.
And I remember our sweet nurse practitioner coming in when it was finally time. And 2, it's very day to day still in this, because like we talked about, they have to meet certain criteria. Yeah. And if, say, their oxygen drops, then that time,
you restart.
Like that kind of clock starts over. Yeah. And so it is very day to day, because you're like, okay, are they going to reach the 48 hours?
Yeah.
Are they going to do this? I don't know. And so it's like, once they do, and then it's okay. I remember a nurse practitioner coming in, and she was like, okay, like, as long as nothing happens tonight, like, I think they're going to be ready to go home tomorrow. Right. Are you ready to bring them home? And I like, I think I immediately, like, my eyes filled with tears. She was like, if you're not, like, it's it. I mean, we can give you like a day or two, like, blah, blah, blah. And my husband was like, no, we're ready. And I was like, oh, no, I need more time.
Yeah.
Right.
It's funny because we'd been there 100 days. And I was like, no, I need more time.
Right.
Yeah.
I need to prepare.
How did you juggle 2 of your boys being home while you had another in the NICU? How did you balance that?
It was hard. And actually, this day, today, 2 years ago, we were in the middle of that. And so it's been kind of a hard past weekend. I believe it was like 2 years on the dot that we brought 2 home.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was talking to, I think, my husband, and it was such an exciting but also terrifying day to bring them home while simultaneously starting the hardest month of our life. Because again, at that time, only my husband and I were allowed in NICU. So
that was during that Delta wave of COVID, wasn't it?
I think so.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that was the one that was so hard on kids.
And so hard on pregnant women. There were lots.
I remember that from
deaths.
being in the hospital.
Yes, at UAB. UAB was.
We canceled my daughter's first birthday. It was that weekend because it was hitting kids so hard. And I was like, I don't even think we can have an outside birthday party.
UAB lost
a
lot.
Of
St. V did too.
Very healthy.
It was bad. It was bad news.
So it was just like a very
young, pregnant
scary,
women.
Like
horrible
no risk
time.
factors. Like it was.
They
bad.
actually had they started like a whole COVID mortality committee based on those events because there was so much.
Yeah, it was. And so I remember, and there were like some of those babies getting brought to the NICU, that survived. And the mom hadn't survived, but yeah. So I was balancing 2 on oxygen
NICU.
at home.
1 in the NICU plus
one
COVID Delta wave.
Yes. And the one in the NICU was still in the NICU because he had gotten very sick in kind of end of July. He developed something called pulmonary hypertension.
But that's super dangerous and very scary.
It's very dangerous. And at the time, I don't think I realized how serious it was. So we, little kind of backstory in this 24-hour period. Our boys had gotten moved kind of to the step-down unit. And they just weren't quite ready and did not do well in the step-down unit. And our smallest got very, very sick and got quickly moved back up to the NICU. And that was when they realized he had pulmonary hypertension. And at the time, I didn't really realize how serious that was or really what that meant. And I will never forget being in his NICU room with one of the fellows that we loved, and he was sitting there talking to me, and our baby, it was Harrison, was so sick, laying in the bed. We weren't allowed to touch him. We weren't allowed to hold him. He was kind of tilted on his belly, kind of like you saw a lot of people during COVID. And I'll never forget, the doctor was talking to us. It was late afternoon. They were getting him all admitted, and he was so close to being intubated. I'll never forget, the intubation kit was sitting in his bed, and they couldn't get him to sat. They just kept going up, because he had been down to maybe a liter of nasal cannula. That's why we were in the step-down unit.
Right.
But this happened so quickly, and his poor body filled up with fluid so quickly and couldn't breathe, and they couldn't get him to sat, and they just kept going up. Finally, they got him to sat on 100% of CPAP, which is basically the step down from being intubated. And the intubation kit, I remember, sat there. And
for listeners, intubation means ventilator.
Yes.
So that is a tube being put in, and for breathing for yourself or your child. This is
the lung life support.
This is the lung life support. So she is staring there. You've been down this road. Personally, you've almost all these things, and you're seeing this.
But it's still. And honestly, I'm thankful. I look back and I'm like, how did I not realize? But our nurses and our doctors, they handled it so well and were very calm and kept me calm.
Yeah.
And so I really didn't realize how serious it was, which I think now looking back was good, that in the moment I did not realize that. Yeah. And now I've seen statistics, and it can be pretty fatal for preemies. So again, I didn't realize that at the time, but
which is a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing. It's not something you need to know when you're in the middle of it. So I remember sitting there talking to our fellow who we'd had a ton and we loved. And I was already fighting to get the boys back upstairs because there just were some things happening. They were desatting a lot. They were having to be bagged during the night. They just they weren't ready to be on the low amount of oxygen that they were. So we were already kind of fighting that. And they called a code over the intercom.
No.
Mm-hmm. And the fellow that I was talking to like jumped up and ran. And they called a code down in the step down unit. I didn't realize it was one of my other children.
Oh.
And not until after. So about 30 minutes pass. Thank God I don't know that it's one of our other babies. And he comes back up and he sits down and he's like, Wells coded downstairs. And we're going to bring him back up. I need you to come with me. We're going to readmit him up here, this and that. So within about an hour, I had one that was
pulmonary hypertension. Close to being intubated.
So close to being intubated. Horrible. So sick. And then I had one that had just coded downstairs and was blue. So that was probably one of our hardest NICU days. And so we got brought back up. But anyways, that was why Harrison stayed for a month longer. So that was a huge setback, honestly. And so he had to, work back to getting on that home oxygen setting. And so it was those things that, like, you saw how quickly things could change and do change in the NICU. And so there is so much fear of bringing them home. And I just remember I kept telling them, like, I can't do this at home.
Yeah.
What do I do if something like this happens? And so, I overheard, it was shift change, and I overheard the night shift fellow come on. And I think the UAB, like, NICU, the main NICU is called RNI. Mm-hmm. And I think it's 60 beds. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And I remember overhearing her say, I'm most concerned with him in room so-and-so making it through the night. And that's when I was like,
excuse me.
Oh, this is bad. So that was one of the scariest times in the NICU. And so Harrison ended up staying about an extra month. He was there about 130 days.
And, and I think it's so important. It's just that backstory is like again, we talk about world prematurity. We talk about preemie babies and they see these, they're the cutest things ever, 2-year-old boys. And we talk about this day and we have the privilege of knowing your story and our listeners, but like they don't, they're like, well, yeah, it means something to her, but it really means so much to you. The road you walked and all these parents that we've, you saw your child, you didn't know if they would survive. You saw them compromise. You didn't know what to do. You've seen and heard things that parents should not have to see and hear. And you carry that. So this day means so much is that, yes, we celebrate our advancements and but that is a road that has been walked of grief and loss and trauma. Absolutely. And this day reminds us of that. Mm-hmm. Right. It does. It brings it back and we fight for it. But then we also fight for this whole, like, don't ask to come see the babies. Right. Don't ask why I'm not coming to this event.
Respect whatever I don't care boundaries if I have in regards to health and wellness. I don't care if you think that's allergies. What if it's not? Right.
Oh, that was we brought our boys home in the fall.
So cold flu RSV season.
September and October. So we were just getting into that. And, you do it. And it's hard. You want people to meet your baby. Right. And you want to be able to go to these things. And that was another thing when you see friends bringing their baby everywhere and doing all these things. It's a reminder that
I can't do that.
See, and that's another grief right there.
It is.
It's a loss of what you want to do. And you hit holidays. You went back to back to back. So it was like a constant, the family's together here. Oh, we're doing this with Santa here. And you're just like,
I can't.
And you just you constantly feel like the bad guy. And I think that's probably just the mom's always going to feel that way.
Right.
And you just have to remind yourself that you are doing what's best for these babies. And I think one thing for me was I was like, even to this day, I have watched them fight to live from the second they came onto this earth. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to do everything in my power to never be in that position again.
Right.
And I think you just have to remember that, like, you have to do what's best for them. Yeah. You are their only advocate.
Yes.
And they can't advocate for themselves. And it's hard. And, sometimes you want to be like, it would probably be fine if, like, we just went and did this one thing. Mm-hmm. And it was 2 years that we really tried to.
Yeah.
And that's 2 years.
Minimize
People need to
that.
like repeat that. 2 years that she had to essentially live in this bubble.
Yeah.
And like
to keep her children alive.
Readmissions to keep alive. So sorry she didn't make that one gathering.
And because you hear it, and I think people hear it, but it's just one of those things that you kind of don't understand until you've been through it. But like your runny nose.
Yes.
And that is something you hear. I think it's just allergies.
That's the excuse.
It gets written off so many times.
It may be allergies, but it may not. Like we
can't risk that.
We can't risk.
Well, just like RSV presents as just a routine head cold in adults, it can be very detrimental for babies.
All 3 of our boys were admitted for RSV, and they had the RSV vaccine. Thankfully, the RSV vaccine was huge because yes, they were admitted, but it could have been so much worse.
Right.
You know, they needed extra oxygen.
Okay.
And just some extra breathing support. And for a few days.
Were they intubated for it?
No. And see, that's the thing. And kind of they say with that Synagis is it's kind of, they say that like with the preemies and stuff, that Synagis is not necessarily to keep them from getting it, because that's not necessarily how vaccines work, but you know, they may still get it, but it's the difference in the ICU and just a regular hospital admission. Right. That's kind of how we were explaining.
And like oxygen support versus being intubated.
And it worked. I mean, it worked. Will got it. And that's the thing that was so difficult to explain to people about RSV is like, there is not like an antibiotic you can get for RSV.
No. It's a virus that has to run its course.
So like you have to literally watch it happen. And that's what was so difficult for people to understand. They're like, well, can't you just take a medicine? Well, no. And then, you know, I think I want to touch on too, before we close this, is you don't need to put on anything extra for a preemie parent of saying, well, is there going to be something wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Don't ask intrusive questions.
What does this mean for them? You know, I've been asked that. I'm sure you've been asked that. It is nobody's business.
Right. Let the parents tell you what they feel is appropriate to tell you.
And I think it's nobody's business, but also you don't know.
Right. We don't know.
Day by day. We didn't know. Like
exactly.
You don't know everything at birth. You don't know how they're going to develop.
And we already wondered this, and we already play worst case scenarios in our mind.
Well, naturally.
We don't need any extra help.
Yeah, don't help us. We got it on our own.
I don't need you to remind me.
We don't need more thoughts.
Yeah. And you're already living that. Like, you know, are they? You know, you see them do one funny thing, and you're like, oh god.
Well, you're going, because every time they go to a pediatrician visit, you are going to be told if they're on the milestone chart or they're on the growth chart, and you don't need any extra help.
No.
Yeah. And thankfully, our boys have done phenomenal.
Right.
And I mean, they're doing amazing right now. We are in therapies and things like that, just kind of, even now, kind of more preventatively. But, you know, one of ours didn't roll over until 9 months old.
Yeah.
Well, but when you look at the adjusted age
and
all those medical complications, that's very appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
But as a mom.
Into the outside world, they're like, well, I do remember. Now I don't get it so much, obviously, because they are really doing everything they should be. But that was a big thing, like being out in public, you know.
People make comments.
Even children, like being at the hospital or a doctor's appointment. Well, how old are they? And then you tell them how old they are, and they're like,
and then you have to say,
like, are you sure that they're 9
And you have to be like, then you have to say, oh, well, but they were born at this, and this is
and
you
then you have to
justify, and you have to explain.
You know, where people are like, oh, but they're not walking. Like, no, they're not.
And they make very much often comments.
But they're surviving.
Right. And they'll get there, but it's been eye-opening what people are comfortable asking and saying.
Totally.
So here's the thing. If someone decides to ask a mom, how old are your babies? And you think, oh my goodness, that 9-month-old looks like a 4-month-old. Your response doesn't need to be, are you sure? But why aren't they meeting such and such milestone?
You tell that mom she's doing great, and that baby's great.
You need to tell that mom, you know what? That is a wonderful stage. It is such a sweet stage. I'm so happy for you. Be positive. Be positive.
Because I promise they
already know.
They already know
They're
that
well
their
aware.
child's not sitting up. And yeah, I mean, they got there. And I mean, my goodness, look at their start to life. Like,
They are just like miracles.
Right.
Yeah.
And
so it's been amazing. We've, had our fair share of all the therapies.
Yep.
And they go to the Bell Center, which has been incredible.
I love the Bell Center.
Yeah, we love the Bell Center. I can't say enough good things. And all 3 of our boys are there now. And it's just been great. One started going as an infant, and then the other 2 started as toddlers. Just kind of, I signed them back up for this semester, actually. And my husband was like, "What? You kept all 3 of them there? They're fine." And I was like, I'm just not ready.
And that's okay.
To not have like a super close set of eyes on them yet.
Yeah.
But you know what? If you have resources available to you, use them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's been one thing, like going through all of this. Gosh, we're so fortunate for what we do have here in Birmingham. I mean, both for like the care that I went through, the babies, the NICU that they were in, I truly believe, because other people that I've met and other people that I know and seeing their outcomes, like I truly don't believe any of our outcomes would have been what they are had we not been here at UAB, and just all of the resources that we do have available here that, we've learned people drive hours for.
They do.
Right.
And
people
even
drive
in our
hours.
state,
Absolutely.
There's moms that drive over 2 hours for OB care.
For OB care, and the boys being in like outpatient physical therapy and OT, and people would drive 2 hours there and back twice a week for their kids' therapies. And I'm like, it's 7 minutes from our house. And so I think, it's easy to take that for granted, all that we do have here. But the NICU itself too, I mean, there were babies being transported to the UAB NICU
flown
every single day, flown in. Mm-hmm. And I remember they told us because MFM was that way, most people were not from Birmingham. They were coming from, basically the whole Southeast.
Yes.
A lot of them would have to get apartments, and they were coming from Florida and Kentucky and Georgia and the Carolinas everywhere, just to see UAB's high-risk OB appointment.
Well, I want to celebrate you and those sweet boys on this day. But I think it's really important that, yes, it's a celebration, but this is awareness. This needs to be an everyday conversation. And let's not make things harder. Let's move it forward with how we're supporting the preemie parents on an everyday basis. Mm-hmm. We're not asking those questions. We're making it better. But we love you. Thank you for coming back.
And we're going to post some vulnerability.
Yes, we're going to post some super cute photos of the boys this week for this episode, so you guys can get to know her. But follow her and follow us. But guys, it's a special day for us. But thank you for being part of it. And all right, guys, till next time.
And see ya.
All right.
Maternal mental health is as important as physical health. The Previa Alliance podcast was created for and by moms dealing with postpartum depression in all its variables, like anxiety, anger, and even apathy. Hosted by CEO, founder Sarah Parkhurst, and licensed clinical social worker Whitney Gay, each episode focuses on specific issues relevant to pregnancy and postpartum. Join us and hear how other moms have overcome mental health challenges, as well as access tips and suggestions on dealing with your own challenges as moms. You can also browse our podcast library and listen to previous episodes at any time. Please know you're not alone on this journey. We're here to help.